Good morning, everyone. I am live and sorry about that test yesterday, but we had to make sure everything was working and working the way it's supposed to. We're excited because we're going to have a conversation real quick with First Deputy Commissioner Benjamin Tucker. He was born and bred New Yorker, born in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, went to John Jay College, City University, Fordham University, became a cop at the age of 18 years old and spent the last 40 years of his life in law enforcement, criminal justice. He was also, you need to know this, appointed by Bill Bratton as the NYPD's 43rd First Deputy Commissioner. Also, in the 1980s, he worked for the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board. So he knows both sides of the arguments and the issues, from a policing side and also from a community side. Deputy Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Reverend Bernard. How are you today?
I'm glad to be alive. After what I went through with COVID, I'm glad to be alive and talking to you, Commissioner. And I'm glad I'm not in your shoes. You and the commissioner, the police commissioner of the department, you guys got your hands full with all of this that's going on. But I'd like to have a conversation. We have thousands of people who are tuning in and, they want to hear something. They want to understand from someone on the inside, especially as a man of color, and we make no bones about that. We appreciate our distinctions, our ethnicities, our language, our cultures, our race. That's the beauty, unity and diversity. That's what community is all about.
Absolutely.
But I think that we've got some issues that, we need to talk about. And, issues like transparency, policy, legislation, training, community relationship building. And I'd like to go through that. Now, let me just put it up front on the record. All right. They're talking about defunding police. I want you to know where A.R. Bernard stands on this, and those that follow me to know. I think police officers put their lives on the line every day. Their families pray for them to come home at the end of the day. That's a big job, and it's a big responsibility. PBA President Pat Lynch came out and said police officers are professionals. And I agree with that. And I think because they're professionals, they should be paid more money, not cut. They should be paid more money. However, I also believe because they're professionals, because we entrust them, there's a public trust, they should also be paid more money and held to a higher standard. So let's begin, Commissioner. What's your response to the current climate in our city?
Well, clearly the current climate is tumultuous, frankly, but it's also a revolution. I testified before the city council yesterday and for 4 hours, and we had lots of discussion. But I said in my testimony that this was passionate outrage. That's what I call because I think that's what this is. People, this sort of the perfect storm in many ways, and part of the storm, it's a dark storm, because the death of George Floyd is the sort of the spark that fueled where we are right now, how we got here. And then if you add to that and you overlay the COVID, the coronavirus, and the impact that it's had, that is for all of us, not just here in New York City, not just in America, but across the country, across the world, is really a devastating impact. So when you look at the setting in which we are, this frame right now, and so to sum it up, we're coming out of COVID. We're hopefully coming out of COVID, but the impact of it and the devastation of it is still here, very much alive. There's an article in today's Times with Dr. Fauci speaking about COVID, and among many things that he speaks about in terms of it being challenging and them not knowing enough about the illness. He also cites in there, and you should read the article, because it speaks to the issue and the disparate impact that COVID has had on the Black community. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big part of this equation, in terms of the vulnerability of Black people with respect to that virus. So there are lots of things that have come together. The political climate is now very, very dynamic, and we're going into the period of thinking about new budgets, and so a lot to talk about. To your comment earlier about defunding police, I'm not sure what people mean when they say defunding.
Right.
It has, you could attach different connotations to it. So I'll leave that aside for a moment. But I'm just sort of painting the picture for where we are and setting the stage in response to your question. So that's the climate, and we've had, as a result of COVID, police department is the first responder, and so we had to think about what we were going to be, what our role was going to be in early March, and beginning on March 12th, we were, sort of changing the way we were doing business and refocusing our attention on the virus and all the aspects of it, and being fed by the guidance that we were getting from the CDC, from the Department of Mental Health, the City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, but also from the mayors and the governor's executive orders, in response to the guidance they were getting and indicating what we had to pay attention to with respect to social distancing initially, but then also wearing masks and also keeping people away from people in order to keep the curve and flatten the curve, which by that time had begun to grow and really impact the city. Police department was charged with trying to figure that all out and be involved in making arrangements and assigning people to those assignments, where we were trying to make sure businesses that were supposed to be closed and not operating during that period, based on the governor's order, making sure we had to go inspect those things. We also had to keep track of some of the other challenges that came out of COVID with respect to the challenges people were facing and some of the stress that was occurring. I think this virus has stressed us all out to the max. So that's
right.
So
let me ask you a question.
That's the range. That's where we are right now.
Yeah. So COVID-19 compounded by the murder of George Floyd, and I'm using that language because that's what I believe and feel, by George Floyd, like you said, created a perfect storm. But these two things also revealed, or should I say exposed, it wasn't a revelation because many of us knew that there were problems, but it exposed the serious deficiencies and inequities within our social systems and structures. And one of the things that, for me, the silver lining is that there was a national consensus of outrage with regard to all that's going on, especially with George Floyd. So you had white folks upset, black, brown folks, Latino, Asians upset. People on both sides of the political aisle were condemning it. We haven't had a national consensus of outrage like this since the 1960s. Right. Everybody was on the same page, and we still are, in terms of that something has to be done. Now, COVID exposed inequities in how policing was done. Right. We've seen those videos. And let me commend the commissioner. We were in a meeting, and he acknowledged that there are inequities in terms of how policing is applied. Correct? Because you've been there a long time, 40 years, so you know police culture. And I don't want to judge all police officers by a few bad apples. I don't think that's fair to paint them with a broad stroke brush, just as I don't think it's fair to paint all African Americans by the actions of one or a few of us. All right? So I get that, but those inequities are there. So let's begin with the fact that the legislators repeal 50A. And 50A was controversial because it essentially protected information about police officers' misconduct. All right? So now we're saying, okay, transparency is what we want. How do you feel about that?
Well, listen, well, 50A it's sort of a dinosaur. It's a piece of legislation that's been around for decades, and so its purpose at that time, compared to where we are today, is probably long. My sense of it is that we're at this place now where we are being more transparent. We're trying to be more transparent. We tried to, even before the 50A issue was raised, provide more information about our disciplinary process and how and publish those information, publish that information as much as we could online. But initially the 50A was about protecting officers, mostly in the context of making sure that their personal information, they weren't identified and wasn't out there to be identified, so that they could avoid being put in harm's way, right? I mean, to protect their identity, and that was before social media, right? That was
now information is available, right?
It's almost moot, right? I mean, it's a moot issue because you can get information online, and they do on our officers, and that happens even now with respect to threats. So 50A going away. We wanted to amend the legislation to give us the opportunity and the ability to publish much more information than we were able to make available. And of course, the legislature has now decided that repeal of the entire bill was better. We'll live with that. And so now we're now thinking about how we do what we do with respect to using the information that we have when we discipline folks.
Yeah, and let me tell you something. I think police officers, especially their family, if I'm a cop and I let my broken and wounded humanity get in the way of how I'm serving and protecting the public, I don't want my family to have to be penalized for that. And my information could jeopardize my family. So I get that. I understand that. Finding the right balance of that is the challenge at hand. Let's move to policy, because you take like the chokehold with Eric Garner, all right? From what I understand, use of a chokehold by police officers has been banned as police policy for 29 years. Do I have the right information?
Yes, you do.
All right. So it's banned as police policy, all right? But the problem is it's not illegal. So if an officer engages in something like that, like Pantaleo did, all right, there is action that's taken in disciplinary action within the police department, its code of conduct, etc. But the problem is the public feels that, they tend to get away with it, especially when it's somehow related to the cause of death of someone, when it's not legal. So translating certain policies into legislation makes a difference. It's like in Minnesota, they have now banned the use of the knee, right?
Right.
So things can be banned in terms of police policy, but it's a matter of making it legislation to carry it a step further. How do you feel about that?
Well, listen, there was always a statute under which officers could be prosecuted for their conduct. They can for almost any of their conduct. We give officers firearms if they use a firearm and they use it improperly. That could put them in harm's way for criminal prosecution. So that was no different with respect to chokehold or any other conduct that an officer engaged in that somehow resulted in an injury to an individual, a citizen, for example, and was not justified, not reasonable under the policies and the use of justification, for example, in the penal law, but also what's reasonable versus what's unreasonable. So we are, I think with respect to the chokehold, the other practical side of this is the chokehold. As I said, you noted we haven't. It's been prohibited by the NYPD for 29 years. Other departments have policies that actually teach how to use a chokehold to put people out. Right. So So you got this broad sense. I mean, we recognize that didn't make sense. We're not interested in choking people out. We are very much now moved to de-escalation and trying to keep people under control. And to the extent that we have to make an arrest, we prefer to do that with compliance and have the individual subject comply rather than having to use force. But that's not the reality, right?
Right.
People are not out there looking to be arrested. So where we are now with the chokehold policy, we've had it in place. We hold people accountable if they use it, and we'll deal with that, and we do. We have our own disciplinary process, and we can make judgments and decide how to proceed. But that doesn't make the officers immune from criminal process. Even before this change in legislation.
I'm glad you said that, because there are people that think that officers are immune, and it's kind of, they're dealt with closed door and the public doesn't know what's going on and they're somehow protected from further prosecution. And that's really not true. Now, you said training. I think that's so important. That's the next thing on my list because, excuse me, I understand that in some precincts, some departments across the country, their training tends to be somewhat responsible for the militarizing of the police mindset in their particular departments. I've been involved in some of the training in the academy with NYPD, the term verbal judo, which means using language and communication in the place of physical interaction. And a lot of people don't know that there is the kind of training to de-escalate situations that police have here in the New York City Police Department. We can't talk about other police departments, but definitely this one, and people need to know about that. So speak to the training and what's being done to build better relationships and dismantle very aggressive policing.
Well, there's training and then there's policy, right? I think they go hand in hand. I mean, so we revamped our entire use of force, rewrote our use of force policy and use of force in our patrol guide, which is sort of the Bible that holds all the procedures and what you can do, what you can't do, but also structures the way in which we do what we do. But the policy for force was spread out in different sections of the guide. So we brought all of that together for purposes of getting some clarity. But we, the idea of use of force has always been, you use the necessary force that's the force that's necessary if you have to use it, and no more than necessary. That is something that we in the department have done and taught for years. More recently, and starting in 2014, and in particular as a result of the death of Mr. Garner. And what we realized at that point was that the department tactics were not really what they should be. And we realized that the notion of de-escalation, the idea of de-escalation, needed to be a part of the training, be focused on more directly than we have and had done in the past. And so that is the, how would you say, that is the approach that we took. We added, after Mr. Garner's death, we added 3 additional days of training. We train, there are 2 days of firearms training that officers typically get in the NYPD, and that was pretty much it. Every other bit of training was sort of whatever new policies or procedures we put into place. We'd send out memos, but we do training. We conduct some training to bring people up to speed, but we needed to do more of that. So the 3 additional days. One of those days is always tactics. It's always, how do we de-escalate, and when we have to escalate, how do we do that properly, and how do we assess, what's the decision-making process for that, for doing that. And so we really took a deeper dive in that regard, and we trained on tactics. We trained on how to and included in that training how you stay away from and be consistent with our chokehold policy, stay away from the neck and compression of the arteries in the neck, and causing shortness of breathing and so forth, as we use physical force to get a subject under control. So while that was always the case, we redoubled our efforts and we retrained everyone in that regard. And the training has been really prolific. We've trained people, the officers, in life-saving measures, added different types of training there, and CPR for sure, tourniquet use of tourniquets and that sort of thing. So training has been, in everything that we've done in the last 6.5 years, at the forefront of allowing us to make the changes in a variety of areas. And so
they're working. You're working. Continue to develop training. And let me tell you something. I'll be honest with you. As a man of color in the New York Police Department, that's a tough position to be in, especially if you're in leadership, because there are those who will call you a token black, and you know the kind of stuff that comes at people like you. I'm glad you're there, because I'll tell you, when I personally sat at the table with Donald Trump in the beginning of things, it's because I felt I needed to be there as a face that could affect change. All right. But once I realized that it wasn't going to happen, I stepped down. But I feel and understand the pressure of a person of color being in an environment that is predominantly other. And, it's a tough place for you to be in, but you've stuck it through. You suck it out. You know the police culture. And from what I have seen interacting with you, you're there to make a difference. I think that it's going to take a lot to dismantle, any broken social systems. And they're all broken in some way historically here in the United States. We're a place of critical mass. It's going to require a disruption of the status quo until it's untenable and inconvenient, and change is the only alternative. So what's going on to create an environment that roots out bad cops? Because the good cops are suffering because of the bad cops.
Well, let me just say, when you talk about the changes, just one comment with respect to me and my color and all of that. One of the things, my experience in over these last 5 decades in this business is started with who I am and what I do and how I believe and what I think about policing, is all formulated by my early days in coming into this department. But it's also structured and shaped by who I was as a teenager, a black teenager growing up in Brooklyn. I used to be hassled by cops, didn't like cops. At that time, 95% of the police force here in New York City were white males. So that's the context in which I grew up. In the 60s was certainly a decade of evolution and revolution, and it really. It was the good, the bad, and the ugly. But out of that came extraordinary progress in many ways, and including in policing. And that sort of sparked some of the changes. But I came into this department as an 18-year-old as a police trainee. When I came in, I took the exam by accident. That is to say, a buddy of mine rang my bell one morning and said, "Let's go take this test." And I was a junior in high school. And I was working since I'm 14. I had my working papers, and I had a job. I've worked ever since. And I said, well, I'll get out of bed and go take this test because maybe it'll be insurance. If I need a job, I'll have a job, right? That's how it happened. But when I came into the job, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to be the best cop when I finally reached 21. And then during that time, and while I was a trainee, I'd be the best trainee that I could be. And I would show. I actually believed, and I talked to myself about this, I believed that I could be a catalyst for change in the NYPD if I could demonstrate that, for those folks who somehow would think that all black kids out there were engaged in illegal conduct and knocking people in the head and sort of, robberies and all of that sort of thing, that people who look like me can be good cops.
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
really make a difference. So
Yeah.
so that's the background. But so coming back to the NYPD in 2014, when you talk about change, 2014 was a seminal moment for this department, I believe, and we were just coming off of the heels of the stop and frisk debacle with all of the the 700 almost 700,000 stops and frisks that at its height in 2011. So during that decade, that was not a good thing, and we ended up with 3 lawsuits, and those lawsuits led to the appointment of a federal monitor who we're still working with. So it wasn't a good time. It was a dark time, I think, in the agency and for the agency. And so we've come a long way since then, and the training has been progressive. Not only the training around force and de-escalation, but also just on social justice and procedural justice and paying attention to fairness and equity. We revamped our disciplinary system. We use technology to help do the job more effectively. We put smartphones in the hand of our officers, which help them be able to respond more quickly to calls for service and help from people, from our citizens. We also built a counterterrorism platform that is second to none and has kept this city safe more than people actually know. And so all of those things happened in this last 6.5 years. We body-worn cameras. We waited a while before we implemented body-worn cameras, but Commissioner Bratton and I, we understood that we needed to move in that direction. And of course, the federal judge ordered that we do a body-worn camera pilot, which we did do. But even before that pilot was complete, we went ahead and began to assign body-worn cameras to our personnel. We now are the largest body-worn camera in the agency.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think equipping the officers is great. And then there's the argument that they can turn that camera off or manipulate it. So the question is, what are we doing to build the character of individuals? Because people come in, during the interview, everybody's on their best behavior. So you come in and you could pass muster to become a police officer. But we all have baggage in some way. What, in terms of character building and exposing people who have issues, is there something that's built into the training and ongoing assessment of police officers while they are employed by the police department to try and detect when there are issues, when there are problems, and address them?
So we, the training, we have, our training has always been, it's been broad. Officers get lots of training around, we had a whole social sciences portion of the curriculum, which focused on teaching officers, well, first of all, the standards are very high, and teaching them to be familiar with and understand the diversity of this city. So race and gender and all of that type of training took place. But we also gave them training in 2014 as part of those 3 days, training on just reflecting on who they were as police officers, the nobility of the profession, what's required, reminding them of why, when they took this job, what the oath is that they swore to and committed to. And so that's been an ongoing part of the training. We also, more recently in the last couple of years, focused on this issue of implicit bias, recognizing that this is not overt racism that we were worried about. We were worried about this notion of all of us, each of us, every one of us has biases, and we wanted to make our officers aware of the fact that we don't want you, to the extent that we all have these biases, whatever they may be, and it's not always about color or gender, or it could be any number of things and reasons, but we don't want that bias to impact or affect your decision making or your exercise of discretion. So
right.
So we spent a lot of time sensitizing our officers to those areas and to focus on and to get them and remind them of really what their role is, and to give them the tools to do that. The
Commissioner, we've come to kind of the end of our time, but I mean, you've covered a lot, you've answered a lot, you've been a candid discussion, and I appreciate that. And you're going to be, actually, when I say you, I'm talking to the police department, is going to be really, really have to be creative and innovative during the summer period, especially when it comes to building better relationships with the community, between the police department and the community. Just briefly speak to what PD is doing to build better relationships with the communities, especially communities of color.
Well, I'll speak, about our neighborhood policing. I mean, the other monumental and profound change that we engaged in 2014 and into 2015, right straight through now, was the creation of the movement. We remodeled our patrol function, restructured it under Commissioner O'Neill. It was his idea that we really needed to think differently about how we rebuild trust, and either rebuild it or build trust with our communities, in particular communities of color. Remember, this was coming off the heels of the stop and frisk, which is, resulted in,
right.
And so that's one of the things that we began to do. When I say restructured, we changed the assignments, the way we structure precincts. We dedicated personnel to sectors, and personnel to what we call neighborhood coordination officers, to be, while they're still law enforcement officers, but these were folks who were going to be able to engage in community directly. They were assigned to the same real estate, the same sectors of the city every day that they worked, and they would become familiar with all of the issues, the conditions, and the challenges in those communities, and then work with communities on solving those problems. So that's in the broad strokes. But we also dedicated officers who respond to calls for service, because we also have to respond to those 911 calls and 311 calls, and those officers as well would be working in those same areas every time they came to work. So that's helped, I think, in our outreach, and the response from the communities has been, I think, quite good, and so that makes a huge difference, and has made a huge difference in the way in which we've done business. But we still have more to do, right? And so I think, to sort of, as we get to the end of this, as we think about what is next for us in this climate, based on everything that's happening now with respect to the new changes in legislation at the state level, but also the city council bills that are pending and that they've proposed, that we testified on about yesterday. All of those things, we have to. One of the things that we, Commissioner Shea and the rest of our executive leadership team, certainly are aware of, and that is that we have to, we are continue to be introspective about what we're doing. What is it about our culture that we need to change? You mentioned the officers who were caught on video engaged in, as you suggested, bad apples. Those officers, we've taken steps to discipline those officers, as we should. We have high expectations, and we have 36,000 officers in this department, and by and large, the vast majority, come in and do their jobs every day and get it right.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because too often we buy into the myth that all police officers are bad, and that's not true. You have children, right? You have children.
I have one son.
One son, and let me ask you a question. Did you have to have that conversation with your son, even though you were in law enforcement, that all Black men have to have with their sons in this country when it comes to dealing with police? I had to have it with my sons and my grandchildren.
Yeah.
Did you have to have that conversation?
I told my son, I said, if you ever get stopped, first words out of your mouth is, my dad's on the job. On the job means, any
I got you. I know. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, listen, that was the reality. I told you, I was one of those kids, who used to get stopped. So, listen, so listen, that is a reality. people sometimes become offended when you say, you had the conversation. Listen, you know, that's a survival technique. That is something that kids need to know. On the other hand, we have to get to a place. We have to get to a place, and I think we can. And we've listen, the extraordinary amount of work that takes place in this department with outreach to young people is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't necessarily know it. Our cops spend a lot of their own time and money in various ways. Not only cops in community affairs, but cops in precincts who are running explorer posts and working with young people all the time. So when we think about change and where we go from here in the future, we're not starting from ground zero. I think relationships, right now, things are very tense and volatile. And I think people are traumatized for a whole host of reasons in addition to COVID. So the environment is charged. But the reality is that we are, as a city, first of all, everyone needs to be on the same page. I said this to the city council yesterday. This notion that somehow the police department has become the center and focus of what's not working well in society and here in the city is a myth, because
that's right. You're only one of the systems, one of the structures, one of the institutions that need to change.
By the way, we're the ones who deal with all the social ills, the things that haven't worked in our social services area, in the housing, the poor housing, you name it, all of the things that we have deficiencies in. But we haven't walked away from it. We keep our nose to the grindstone. Our cops do the work every day. And do we get it wrong sometime? We do. And when they do, we hold them accountable. They know we will hold them accountable. But the climate of sort of, listen, during the protests, we had 354 cops injured. I'm talking about Molotov cocktails, bricks, water bottles filled with cement, hit with bricks in their head, having to go to the hospital, run over by cars. So when people start to complain about the police, and this notion of somehow defunding the police, listen, crime in this city right now is as low as it's ever been. Mm-hmm. So since 1951, I mean, we are, even when we have the upticks with shootings and burglaries and murders, in fact, we still are fighting the lowest numbers ever. And it's been that way, and this trend has existed for the last 6.5 years. So you have to look at the broader picture.
The big picture.
We are committed fully. We have a new commissioner, deputy commissioner for youth services, Chauncey Parker, and he is, the commissioner's, focus. The new commissioner, Shea's focus has been on youth and youth engagement. So we are prepared to continue to move down that path, to do outreach, continue the outreach that we're doing, and even enhance it. And we need to, what I said to the council members, and I say to the people listening here, is that it really is critically important that, the progress that has to be made. We are looking internally about things that we know we need to change still and improve upon. We'll do that. And some of those things will be really bold. But we also need to, in terms of, sort of recovering, if you will, from the condition we're in right now.
Absolutely.
We have to all work together to move in that direction.
And that's what's going to take, Commissioner. It's going to take collective effort, all of us coming together. And let me say this, we're praying for you. There are people who are praying for you. You are in the belly of the beast. Change does not happen overnight. Change is not an event. It's a process. And this is a big ship. And they say it takes 5 miles to turn an ocean liner around. The decision to do it comes in a split second. But the actual practice of it, the implementation of it, takes time. And I know it's going to take time here. But we're going to keep the pressure on, because I believe that unless we disrupt the status quo, things will continue on autopilot. And this is what's necessary to affect change.
I look forward to you keep our feet to the fire. We will react in a way. We are, I think, going to be proactive, and we hear the message loud and clear to get better and better at what we do. I mean, I think we now have the reputation, and we've enjoyed it for a while, as being the best police department in the country, if not in the world, when it comes to local policing, and we treasure that. but we know that we still, in order to hold on to it, need to commit to those.
Right.
To the
and I want to thank you personally for making the decision to model what you would like people to understand and perceive about African American men. We're not all the angry black man. And I appreciate you staying in there to make a difference. Commissioner, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
You know, part of this was sponsored by the New York Board of Rabbis, my friends there who understand the need to have these kind of conversations. So I appreciate that. Rabbi Joe Potasnik, who is
yes, indeed.
watching,
Yeah.
You know. And look, the Cardinal and I, Commission of Religious Leaders, you know, we try to work with all of the different entities within our society so that we can make for peace and make for progress. Commissioner, our prayers are with you and for you and your family.
Thank you. I can use them, and we all can.
All right. God bless you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.